My girlfriend cheated on me with the gym guy for months, but when I heard her say she only used me for the engagement ring, I exposed everything to her parents and they destroyed her in a way she never saw coming. I'm 32 years old. I work in medical equipment sales, and honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago literally turned my life upside down in the most brutal way possible. The thing is, I was about to propose to my girlfriend, Heather. You know, I had the ring bought, I'd talked to her parents, all of that, and I basically discovered she'd been cheating on me for months and laughing at me behind my back. I guess I should start from the beginning, so this whole mess makes sense. I met Heather like 2 years ago at my friend Marcus's Christmas party, who's my best friend since high school. Like that friend you've known since you were 14 and who's basically like a brother. Marcus worked at the same company as Heather. She was in human resources or something like that, and he introduced us because according to him, we were perfect for each other. And honestly, at first everything seemed to be going amazing. I mean, Heather was fun, smart, we got along great, and I thought I'd finally found the right person after a couple of relationships that didn't work out in my 20s. We moved in together like a year into dating, got a nice house on the outskirts of the city. Nothing fancy, but it was our space, and I was completely convinced she was the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Heather's sister, Lindsay, never liked me, and I never liked her either. That was clear from the start. Lindsay was like 4 years younger than Heather, had that spoiled brat attitude she never grew out of. You know the type, always needing attention, always competing with her older sister over everything. Every time we saw her, it was pure negative energy, making passive-aggressive comments about my job, about how I didn't make enough money, about how Heather could be with someone better. I always let it slide because Heather told me Lindsay was like that with all boyfriends, that it wasn't personal, that eventually she'd get over it. Looking back, I have seen it as the huge red flag it was, but when you're in love, you ignore those things. You know what I mean? Heather's parents, Marilyn and Edward, were good people, or at least that's what I thought. Edward was an accountant, Marilyn was a retired teacher. Like traditional middle-class family, very Catholic, very focused on family values and all that. They always treated me well, invited me to family dinners. Edward and I watched football games together on Sundays. When I decided I wanted to propose to Heather, I did everything right. I went to their house one Saturday afternoon, like 3 months ago, talked to Edward first to ask for his blessing, then Marilyn, and they were both super excited. Marilyn even cried a little and gave me a hug. Told me they'd always hoped I'd be the one to marry their daughter. I bought the ring that same week, a diamond ring that cost me like 3 months' salary. Nothing extravagant, but it was beautiful and meaningful. My plan was to propose at Marcus's Christmas party, exactly in the same place where we'd met 2 years before. I thought it would be romantic and perfect. So anyway, like in mid-November, I had a fishing trip planned with some friends from work. One of those trips we organize like twice a year, where we go to a lake about 3 hours from the city and basically disconnect from the world for a weekend. Heather knew about the trip. She had her own plans. She was going to stay home because she had work to finish and wanted to do a marathon of some show with Lindsay. We left Friday afternoon. Everything normal. I said goodbye to Heather with a kiss, told her I'd be back Sunday night, and I left thinking it was going to be a calm and fun weekend. But it turns out that Saturday morning, like 10 inches the morning, one of the guys in the group got sick, like food poisoning or something, and we decided to cancel the trip and all go back home. I got to the house around 2 inches the afternoon on Saturday, and when I was parking, in the driveway, I saw Lindsay's car there, which didn't surprise me because Heather had told me she was coming over. What did seem weird was that there was another car I didn't recognize, a black Honda Civic like a 2020 model, parked on the street right in front of the house. I thought maybe it was someone visiting the neighbors or something. I didn't give it much thought. I opened the front door, trying not to make noise because I wanted to surprise Heather. You know, come home early and maybe plan something romantic for the rest of the day. But when I walked in, I heard voices coming from the living room, and what I heard literally froze me in the hallway. It was Heather's voice and Lindsay's voice, and they were laughing. But it wasn't normal laughter. It was that mocking, cruel laugh, the kind you use when you're making fun of someone. And then I heard Heather say, "I swear, this is verbatim. You don't know how boring Trevor is in bed. I literally fall asleep sometimes." Thank God. Zachary knows what he's doing. And Lindsay was laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world, saying something like, I always knew Trevor was a loser. I don't understand what you saw in him. At least Zachary has money and knows how to treat a woman. I stood there in the hallway with my backpack still in my hand, and I felt like my whole body had turned to ice. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe properly. I could only listen as they kept talking. Heather said something like, the truth is, I'm already bored with Trevor, but it's so convenient living with him. He pays rent. He helps me with everything. It's like having a roommate who also gives you gifts. And Lindsay responded, but what are you going to do if he proposes? Because you know Marcus has been putting that idea in his head. And Heather laughed and said, if he proposes, obviously I'm going to say yes. The ring better be expensive. And then I'll figure out how to get rid of him. Anyway, Zachary already told me he wants to introduce me to his parents. I basically felt like I'd been kicked in the stomach. 2 years. 2 years of my life with this person. And it turns out it was all a lie, that she was using me while sleeping with some other guy from the gym we went to. Because later I realized Zachary was that buff dude who was always at the gym at the same time as us. The one who always smiled at Heather in a way that seemed weird to me, but she told me I was being jealous and insecure. I turned around, left the house as quietly as possible, got in my car, and drove without knowing where I was going. I ended up at a motel like half an hour away, one of those cheap motels that charge by the day, and I stayed there sitting on the bed trying to process what I'd just heard. The first thing I did was cancel everything. I mean, in my head it was already clear this was over. There was no going back after hearing that. I called the jeweler and explained I needed to return the ring. Fortunately, they had a return policy within the first 30 days. Then I stayed in that motel all Saturday and Sunday. I turned off my phone because Heather started calling me like crazy when she realized I wasn't where I was supposed to be. Like she left me like 40 messages asking where I was, if I was okay, that she was worried. The hypocrisy was incredible. Sunday afternoon, I left the motel and drove like an hour to a retreat center, I know in the mountains, one of those quiet places where people go to meditate and disconnect, and I stayed there 2 full days, Monday and Tuesday, just thinking and planning what I was going to do. I didn't want to act on impulse. I didn't want to just scream and make a scene. I wanted the consequences to be real and lasting. Tuesday night, I went back to the city, but not to the house. I stayed at Marcus's apartment, told him everything that had happened, and Marcus was furious, like I'd never seen him so angry, saying he couldn't believe Heather was capable of something like that he felt responsible for introducing us. Wednesday morning, while Heather was at work, I went to the house with Marcus and 2 other friends, and we packed absolutely all of Heather's stuff into boxes. And when I say all, I mean all. Her clothes, her shoes, her beauty products, her books, everything that was hers went into boxes. I hired a locksmith to change all the locks on the house, and I left all of Heather's boxes in the garage with a note taped to the door that said, I know about Zachary. I know everything you said. Your stuff is in the garage. Don't try to contact me. You don't live here anymore. The end. I didn't give her long explanations. I didn't give her a chance to give me excuses, just facts and consequences. After that, I called Marilyn and Edward, Heather's parents, and asked them if we could meet for coffee. They looked confused, but agreed, and we met that same afternoon at a coffee shop near their house. I told them everything, absolutely everything. What I'd overheard, the things Heather and Lindsay had said about me, the affair with Zachary, how she was using me while planning to marry me just for the ring and then get rid of me. Marilyn started crying right there in the coffee shop, and Edward turned pale. Literally looked like he was going to pass out. They told me they couldn't believe their daughters were capable of something like that they'd seen me as part of the family, that they were devastated and ashamed. What happened next was something I didn't expect at all. Marilyn and Edward called me like 3 days later, on Saturday, I think, and told me they'd talked to Heather and Lindsay, that they'd had a horrible family meeting where both of them tried to justify their actions and minimize what they'd done. Edward told me, verbatim, Trevor, Marilyn and I have decided we're going to cut contact with our daughters. We can't support this kind of behavior. We can't pretend what they did is okay. They failed us. They failed you. And they failed the values we raised them with. I didn't know what to say. I never imagined they'd go that far, but Edward sounded firm, disappointed but firm in his decision. And the consequences kept coming. Marcus, who was Heather's direct boss at the company, fired her. I know it sounds heavy, but Marcus explained to me it wasn't just out of personal revenge, but because Heather's behavior had affected morale in the office. Other people on the team had complained about her attitude, and with this whole situation coming to light, Marcus decided it was better to terminate her contract. He did everything legally right, gave her severance and all that, but basically Heather lost her job. Later I found out from a mutual friend that Lindsay initially let Heather stay at her apartment, but after like 2 weeks, she kicked her out because Heather wasn't contributing anything, wasn't looking for work, was just depressed, and waiting for someone to rescue her. And with their parents cutting all financial support, which included rent for Lindsay's apartment because it turns out Edward was paying rent for both of them, well, Lindsay panicked and told Heather to leave. All this happened in like a month and a half, from when I heard that conversation until the end of December. Marcus's Christmas party was scheduled for December 22nd, and I was determined to go. I wasn't going to let this whole situation take away the tradition I had with my friends. Marcus asked me several times if I was sure I wanted to go, if it wasn't going to be too hard for me, considering it was going to be in the same place where I'd met Heather, but I told him I was fine, that I needed to reclaim those spaces, that I wasn't going to let her steal that from me too. The party was amazing. Marcus always throws the best parties. There were like 80 people. Good music, good food, everything decorated with Christmas lights and stuff. I was there with several friends, having drinks, laughing, feeling honestly good for the first time in weeks. And then, like at 9 at night, I see Heather walk through the door. She wasn't invited. Obviously, Marcus hadn't invited her. But there she was, and she looked terrible. Like not terrible in the sense of ugly, but terrible in the sense that you could tell she was a mess. Her hair was unwashed, huge dark circles, wrinkled clothes, and she had that desperate look that tells you the person is on the verge of collapse. Heather saw me from across the room and started walking toward me, and I literally felt like the whole place went silent, even though obviously the music was still playing and people were still talking. She came up and said, "Trevor, please, I need to talk to you. Please just give me 5 minutes." And I just looked at her and said, "We have nothing to talk about. You shouldn't be here." But she insisted, started saying it had all been a mistake, that she really loved me, that the thing with Zachary meant nothing, that the things she said that day, with Lindsay, she said, only because she was mad at me about something she didn't even remember anymore. Basically excuse after excuse. At that moment, something in me broke, not from sadness, but from rage. And I told her in front of all the people who were nearby listening, "Heather, I heard you say you were bored with me, that you were using me, that you only wanted to marry me for the ring so you could get rid of me later. You weren't angry, you were laughing, you were mocking me with your sister while I was working to give you a decent life. So no, I'm not going to give you 5 minutes. I'm not going to listen to your excuses, and you need to leave this party now." Heather started crying, saying it wasn't true, that I'd misunderstood everything. But Marcus and a couple of his friends had already come over and basically escorted her out of the place. She yelled something else before leaving. Something like, I was going to regret this, that I'd ruined her life. But honestly, I didn't care. Anymore. After she left, several friends came up to ask if I was okay, and the truth is I was okay, or at least better than I'd been in weeks. I felt like I'd finally gotten a weight off my shoulders, like that public confrontation had closed a chapter that needed to close that way. I stayed at the party until late, danced, laughed, enjoyed being with people who really appreciated me, and for the first time since I'd discovered the whole deception, I felt like I could breathe. It's been like 4 months since all that. Marilyn and Edward still aren't talking to their daughters. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Heather is living with Zachary now, which is ironic considering her whole plan was to use Zachary as her ticket to a better life and now she's stuck with him. Lindsay apparently is also having problems because, without her parents' financial support, she had to move to a cheaper apartment and get a second job. Marcus is still my best friend. Like we spent New Year's together, and we've gone back to having our game nights on Fridays. I returned the ring and got the money back, which I used to take a trip to Colorado by myself, like a week in the mountains hiking and clearing my mind. Last week I ran into Marilyn at the supermarket. It was awkward at first because we didn't know if we should talk or just say hi and keep going. But she came up and gave me a hug, told me that she and Edward still thought about me, that they still considered me part of their lives even though things with their daughters were a mess. She told me Heather had tried to reconcile with them several times, but they weren't ready for that. That maybe someday, but not now. It was weird hearing that. Part of me feels sorry for Heather and Lindsay because they lost their parents due to their own actions, but another part of me thinks it's exactly what they deserved. I'm not going to lie and say I'm completely over everything. There are still days where I think about what could have been, about the plans we had, about the 2 years we spent together. But every time I start to feel nostalgic or sad, I remember that conversation I overheard, Heather and Lindsay's cruel laughter, how they saw me as a useful idiot, and it passes. I've started seeing someone new. Nothing serious yet, just meeting people and reminding myself that not everyone is like Heather. Marcus says, I'm in my Renaissance era, and I guess he's right. I'm basically rebuilding my life from scratch, but this time with a more solid foundation. Without toxic people, without relationships that aren't what they seem. The craziest thing about all this is that if I hadn't come back early from that fishing trip, if I hadn't heard that conversation, I probably would have proposed to her at that Christmas party 4 months ago. She would have said yes. We would have planned a wedding, and I would have continued not knowing the truth for who knows how much longer. So, in a way, that horrible moment of hearing her mock me saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. And that's enough for now, I guess.